What would happen if you were suddenly told that the fruits you love the most might be slowly destroying your leg strength? Sarah Greenfield had always been a vibrant woman, full of energy and life. At 72, she had lived a life filled with adventure, travel, and family. She was the kind of person who greeted each day with a cup of coffee, a smile, and an unshakable belief that the key to a long and healthy life was simple: eat well, stay active, and love those around you. She loved her fruits, apples, bananas, oranges, and especially mangoes. She believed they were nature's gift, packed with vitamins and essential nutrients that kept her going. But lately, something was changing. Sarah noticed that her once strong legs felt heavy. It was subtle at first, just a little more effort when walking up the stairs or taking a long walk through the neighborhood. But as days turned into weeks, the heaviness became more pronounced. One evening, after an afternoon walk, Sarah collapsed into her armchair, panting and exhausted. Something was wrong. The next day, she visited her doctor, Dr. Matthews, who ran a series of tests and found nothing alarming. "It's just part of aging," he told her with a gentle smile. "Your body is slowing down a bit. It happens to everyone." Sarah wasn't convinced. She had been taking care of herself, eating fresh fruits and vegetables, walking every day, and staying active. If aging was causing her legs to lose strength, she thought, it shouldn't happen so suddenly. But Dr. Matthews didn't have any other answers, so she left his office with a prescription for a set of physical therapy exercises and a few recommendations for a better diet. As she drove home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. She had always believed that natural foods were the key to good health. Could it be that something as simple as the foods she ate were affecting her legs in ways she hadn't considered? That evening, she turned to the internet for answers. The digital world was full of information, but it could also be overwhelming. Sarah searched "foods that weaken muscles in seniors" and scrolled through dozens of articles. Most of them seemed to point to one thing: fruits. She found an article on a health website that caught her attention. The headline screamed, "7 worst fruits for seniors, they could be destroying your leg strength." Sarah clicked on it, feeling a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The article mentioned a number of fruits that seniors often consumed without thinking twice: bananas, mangoes, oranges, and others. According to the author, these fruits were high in sugar and lacked the balance of nutrients needed to maintain strong muscles. In fact, some studies suggested that an overconsumption of certain fruits could lead to a loss of muscle mass, especially in the legs, where muscle weakness was already a common issue in older adults. Sarah's eyes widened as she read on. Could it really be true? Were the fruits she had been eating for years actually doing harm? She had always heard that fruit was good for you, and yet, here she was, reading that certain fruits might be slowly contributing to the very problem she was facing: weak legs. The thought was almost too much to bear. Sarah had grown up in a time when everything was natural, and fruits were the cornerstone of her healthy lifestyle. Was it possible that the advice she had trusted for so long was actually causing harm? She couldn't let go of the idea. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had always eaten a lot of bananas, sometimes 1 or 2 a day. And mangoes? They were her favorite fruit, especially in the summer. Could they really be the problem? Sarah felt a surge of determination. She had to know more. This wasn't just about feeling a little weaker, it was about her quality of life. She couldn't afford to let her legs weaken any further. As she continued reading, she came across another surprising piece of information. The article mentioned a new study by none other than Elon Musk. The billionaire entrepreneur, known for his innovations in technology and space exploration, had recently turned his attention to a different kind of problem: aging and nutrition. Musk had funded research into how certain foods affected muscle strength in the elderly, and his findings were about to change the way people thought about aging. Sarah was intrigued. Elon Musk had made a name for himself by taking on seemingly impossible challenges, but this was something entirely different. Nutrition and aging. It felt almost like science fiction, yet here it was, taking root in the real world. The article explained that Musk's research was just the tip of the iceberg. His team had discovered that certain fruits, those that were high in natural sugars, could contribute to muscle weakness in seniors when consumed in large amounts. While these fruits were certainly healthy in moderation, eating them regularly, especially for older adults, might be counterproductive to maintaining leg strength. Suddenly, everything clicked for Sarah. She had been consuming these fruits for years, thinking they were the key to her vitality, but what if they had been slowly draining her strength without her even realizing it? Her heart raced as she thought about what this meant for her. She wasn't just imagining things, there was science behind it. She had to find out more. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to reverse the damage before it got worse. Sarah knew one thing for sure, this wasn't going to be an easy journey. But if there was a chance that cutting out certain fruits could restore her leg strength, she was willing to try. And if Elon Musk's research held any truth, she might not just be facing a simple food choice. She could be on the verge of a discovery that could change the way seniors approached health altogether. She hit subscribe on the website, her mind already racing with the possibilities. As she closed her laptop, she asked herself, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Her answer came quickly, determination. And with that, Sarah Greenfield set out on a journey that would change not only her life but possibly the lives of countless others. What started as a simple question about her legs was about to open the door to something much larger than she could have ever imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah Greenfield had never been a woman to shy away from challenges. Born and raised in a small town in upstate New York, she was the youngest of 3 siblings, a girl who loved to climb trees, race through the woods, and spend hours swimming in the local lake. She wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but she made up for it with determination and a zest for life that was infectious. Her parents, both teachers, encouraged her curiosity and love of learning. They didn't just teach Sarah academics, they taught her how to live a full and active life. As a child, Sarah was always outside, exploring the world around her. From the age of 8, she was a competitive swimmer, her legs strong from hours spent in the water, powering through laps with the grace of someone who had been swimming for a lifetime. Her family couldn't afford fancy vacations, but every summer, they would pile into the old family car and drive across the country, visiting national parks, museums, and landmarks. Sarah's love of travel and adventure began on those trips, and as she grew older, she continued to explore the world, one destination at a time. Sarah's family was close-knit, her parents instilling in her the importance of health and community. They weren't wealthy, but they lived comfortably, growing their own fruits and vegetables in the garden, making the most of what nature had to offer. That love of nature stayed with Sarah her entire life. As she grew older and moved away from home, she made sure to include fresh, organic produce in every meal. To her, fruits were sacred, they were life-giving, a natural source of energy and vitamins. She believed that if you treated your body right, it would last you a lifetime. At 28, Sarah met her husband, Thomas. He was the love of her life, a man who shared her adventurous spirit. They traveled together, hiked through mountain ranges, and explored tropical islands. They were inseparable, and Sarah often joked that they had never spent a day apart. In their early years of marriage, they built a home together, a cozy, inviting space filled with warmth and love. They had 2 children, Emily and Jack, both of whom inherited their mother's energy and curiosity. Sarah was the kind of mother who made homemade fruit salads and smoothies, using only the freshest ingredients. She believed that feeding her children the best foods was a way to set them up for success in life. It wasn't just about health, it was about giving them the tools to live well. Life was good for Sarah. Her children grew up and left the nest, but they never strayed far. Emily had become a doctor, Jack an architect. They still came home for the holidays, filling the house with laughter and warmth. And then, Thomas, her rock, her partner, was gone. His passing was sudden, a heart attack that no one saw coming. One moment, he was there, helping Sarah prepare dinner in their kitchen, and the next, he was gone. It was the hardest thing Sarah had ever faced. They had built their lives together, and now, she had to figure out how to keep living without him. The grief was overwhelming, and in the months that followed, Sarah found herself withdrawing more and more. The walks she once took around the neighborhood became shorter, and eventually, she stopped altogether. She couldn't bear to walk alone without him. Her legs, which had always been strong, now felt heavy. There were mornings when she would wake up and feel like she could barely lift herself out of bed. The physical decline was slow, but it was undeniable. It wasn't just her heart that was hurting, her body was changing, too. But Sarah wasn't one to dwell for long. After the initial shock of losing Thomas, she threw herself into her work and the community. She volunteered at the local food bank, tutored children in reading, and became more involved in church activities. But no matter how much she threw herself into helping others, there was always a nagging feeling in the back of her mind, the feeling that something wasn't right with her body. At 65, Sarah retired from her job as an elementary school teacher. She spent her days tending to her garden, baking for her friends, and taking long walks around the neighborhood. But as the years passed, the walks became shorter, the pain in her legs more noticeable. She found herself at the doctor's office more frequently, each visit leaving her with more questions than answers. The doctors told her the same thing: "You're getting older, Sarah. It's just part of the process." But that didn't sit right with her. She had always prided herself on taking care of her body, why was it failing her now? Sarah's family and friends tried to reassure her, but they didn't understand. They were all much younger, and they couldn't relate to what she was going through. Her daughter Emily, always the practical one, suggested physical therapy. Her son Jack recommended yoga. But none of it seemed to help. Sarah continued to struggle, and she began to feel increasingly isolated. She didn't want to admit it to anyone, but there were days when she was terrified. Her legs, the very things that had once carried her through countless adventures, were now betraying her. It was on one of these lonely afternoons, while scrolling through her tablet, that Sarah stumbled upon the article that would change everything. At first, she didn't take it seriously. It was just another health blog, offering advice about nutrition and aging. But as she read through the article, something caught her eye. The author mentioned a new study, one that linked the consumption of certain fruits to muscle weakness in seniors. The study was backed by research funded by none other than Elon Musk, the tech mogul whose ventures seem to touch every corner of the globe. The idea that something as simple as fruit could be affecting her health seemed impossible, but the more she read, the more it made sense. Sarah had always believed that fruits were a source of strength. She couldn't imagine that they could be the cause of her leg weakness. But the thought lingered in her mind, refusing to let go. What if she was wrong? What if the very thing she had trusted most, her diet, was doing more harm than good? Her curiosity was piqued. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she needed to find out for herself. She wasn't one to sit idly by when there was a mystery to solve. If this research could help her regain her strength, she was willing to take the risk and test it out. She closed the tablet and stood up, her legs feeling a little weaker than usual. But she didn't let that stop her. With renewed determination, Sarah made a decision: she was going to find out the truth about these fruits, no matter where it took her. Her journey toward recovery had begun. The morning air was crisp, and Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation as she stepped into her kitchen. Her legs, though still heavy, seemed to have a bit more life in them today. She had started incorporating the physical therapy exercises Dr. Matthews had recommended, and while they hadn't worked miracles, she could feel small improvements. It wasn't much, but it was something. However, today wasn't about exercises or therapy. Today, she was going to confront the possibility that her beloved fruits might be part of the reason why her legs were losing strength. Sarah had spent the past few days researching, reading everything she could find on the topic. The article she'd read, backed by Elon Musk's research, had intrigued her, but it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. She found other studies that echoed similar concerns, how the high sugar content in certain fruits could disrupt the balance of nutrients in older adults. The more she read, the more questions she had. She had always trusted fruits, apples, bananas, oranges, and especially her favorite, mangoes. They were nature's candy, packed with vitamins, fiber, and antioxidants. But these articles kept insisting that they might not be as beneficial as she had always believed, especially as she aged. The more she read, the more frustrated she became. Why wasn't anyone talking about this? If this was a legitimate concern, why weren't doctors, nutritionists, or even other health professionals sounding the alarm? Instead, she found vague warnings scattered throughout various health blogs and research studies, none of them offering concrete advice or solutions. Everything she read seemed to be either too extreme or not enough. Could she really trust what she was reading? She turned her attention back to the most recent study she'd found. According to the research, certain fruits, bananas, mangoes, and even oranges, were incredibly high in fructose. While fructose was a natural sugar, consuming it in large quantities could contribute to insulin resistance and muscle degradation, particularly in seniors. The study suggested that this was a hidden factor in the loss of leg strength, a condition that many older adults faced as they aged. It wasn't just a matter of getting older, it was about what they were eating, or more specifically, what they were eating too much of. But then, another article contradicted the first one. It claimed that while high sugar intake could indeed affect muscle health, the benefits of fruit outweighed the risks, if consumed in moderation. Moderation. That word had always been at the back of Sarah's mind. She had always believed that the answer to health was simple: eat a variety of foods, exercise regularly, and keep your body active. Was she doing it wrong all along? Her mind began to race. Could she really be harming herself by eating too many bananas or drinking too many mango smoothies? After all, these fruits were staples in her diet. The thought of giving them up felt impossible. It wasn't just about the nutrients, it was about the comfort and the joy they brought her. Each piece of fruit was a reminder of summer days spent in the garden, her father's famous apple pie, and family picnics at the lake. It was a connection to her past, to the life she'd built. But as Sarah stood there in her kitchen, the reality of her situation started to settle in. She wasn't getting any younger, and her legs weren't getting any stronger. Her muscles were beginning to weaken in a way that she couldn't ignore. Was her love of fruit worth the risk? The decision weighed heavily on her heart, but she knew she had to confront it. What would happen if she stopped eating the fruits she loved? Would her legs get stronger again? Would she feel better, or would she just be left with a gaping hole where something she cherished once stood? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Emily, her daughter, standing on the other side, her face bright but also a little concerned. "Hey, Mom. I just wanted to check in on you. How's everything going?" Emily's voice was warm, but there was a trace of worry in her eyes. Sarah smiled weakly. "I'm doing okay, just trying to figure something out." "Is it about your legs again?" Emily asked, her voice softening as she stepped inside. Sarah nodded. "Yeah. I've been doing my exercises, but it's still hard. And there's something else I've been reading about, fruits." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Fruits? Mom, you're not going to stop eating your bananas, are you? I know you love them." Sarah chuckled, though the laugh was tinged with uncertainty. "That's what I've been wondering. Some of the things I've been reading, they suggest that eating too many fruits could be contributing to my muscle weakness. It's a bit of a shock, to be honest." Emily sat down across from her, her expression serious. "What do you mean? Are they saying that fruits are bad for you?" It's complicated, Sarah replied, feeling the weight of the research on her shoulders. The articles I've found say that some fruits, like bananas and mangoes, have high levels of natural sugars. And when we eat too much of them, it could lead to things like insulin resistance and muscle weakness. Emily frowned. But I thought fruits were supposed to be good for you. They have vitamins, fiber, antioxidants. That's what I've always believed, Sarah said. But now I'm not so sure. I've been eating fruits like they're the key to my health for years. But what if I've been wrong all along? What if they've been part of the problem? Emily sighed and leaned back, clearly torn. Well, Mom, I'm not a nutritionist, but I know that moderation is key. Maybe it's not that fruits are bad, but that eating them in excess isn't great. If you're eating a lot of them, it might be too much sugar for your body to handle, especially as you get older. Sarah nodded slowly, mulling over her daughter's words. That's what I'm starting to think. But it's hard to imagine giving them up completely. Well, you don't have to give them up, Emily said with a reassuring smile. Maybe just try cutting back a little and see if it helps. You don't need to make drastic changes all at once. Yeah, Sarah said, her voice softer now. Maybe that's the answer. It's just hard to let go of something I've always believed in. Her daughter reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I know, Mom. But you're doing great. You've been strong through so much, and you'll get through this too. The conversation left Sarah with more questions than answers, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. The idea of giving up her beloved fruits seemed like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to make a drastic change all at once. Perhaps the solution was simpler than she thought. Maybe the answer wasn't to stop eating fruit altogether, but to make better choices about the fruits she consumed and how often. Sarah was determined to find out. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but she was used to challenges. And this time, she was going to face it head-on. The decision was made. Sarah couldn't keep ignoring the signs. She needed to take control of her health, not just for herself but for the future she wanted. If she wanted to walk through her golden years with strength and vitality, she had to challenge everything she thought she knew about her body and the food she ate. But it wasn't easy. That first day, when she decided to reduce her intake of certain fruits, she felt an unfamiliar sense of unease. The research kept echoing in her mind. The sugars in fruits like bananas and mangoes weren't inherently bad, but they weren't serving her body the way they once did. Over the years, Sarah had read countless books on the importance of a balanced diet, the endless benefits of fresh fruits, and how they could prevent all sorts of illnesses. But now, the truth was more complicated. Aging meant that her body wasn't processing certain sugars the same way it had in her younger years. And while the health experts were quick to tout the benefits of fruit, they never addressed the way these benefits might be counterbalanced by age-related changes in metabolism. Sarah took a deep breath as she prepared her breakfast the next morning. Instead of the usual banana with her oatmeal, she grabbed an apple, one of her favorites, and added it to her cereal. It wasn't a drastic change, but it was a small step. She had already reduced the amount of sugar she added to her coffee, and now, she was starting to consider how other foods might also play a role in the strength of her legs. She began researching alternative foods that could boost her muscle health, foods that weren't too rich in sugars but were still packed with nutrients. Avocados, with their healthy fats and potassium, seemed like an ideal substitute for the sugary fruits she had loved for years. And there were leafy greens like spinach, kale, and broccoli, known for their anti-inflammatory properties and high calcium content. All of these could support bone health and muscle function. Sarah could already picture herself cooking hearty salads with fresh spinach, avocado, and a drizzle of olive oil, simple but satisfying meals. But, as with any change, the shift wasn't without its struggles. That first week, Sarah experienced moments of doubt. She would walk past the kitchen counter where the fruit bowls sat, bananas, mangoes, and oranges, each one looking so inviting. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I feel worse without them? The temptation was real. She felt the absence of those familiar flavors, the sweetness that had been a comfort for so long. But every time she reached for something sugary, she remembered the heaviness in her legs, the way she had struggled to climb the stairs the other day, and how those small steps to the doctor's office had left her out of breath. Her decision was about more than just food. It was about regaining control, about rebuilding her strength in a way that honored both her past and her future. She couldn't afford to hold on to habits that were holding her back, even if those habits had once brought her joy. It's about progress, not perfection. Her journey wasn't just physical, it was mental too. Every day, Sarah reminded herself that change took time. Her body wasn't going to transform overnight, but the small adjustments were already starting to have an impact. Her legs didn't feel as heavy, and there were moments, fleeting but powerful, when she felt a small spark of the energy she used to have. But the real test came when she visited her son Jack and his wife, Caroline. They had invited her over for dinner, and she knew the evening would be full of family, conversation, and, inevitably, food. Sarah had been dreading the meal, unsure of how she would handle the plate full of her favorite dishes. Would she be able to stick to her plan? Or would she give in to the comfort of old habits? When she arrived at Jack's house, the table was set beautifully. There was grilled chicken, a fresh quinoa salad, roasted vegetables, and, inevitably, fruit. A large bowl of fruit salad sat in the center of the table, glistening with ripe strawberries, blueberries, pineapple, and, of course, mangoes. Jack greeted her with a warm hug, but he noticed the hesitation in her eyes. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "I'm just trying something new with my diet, cutting back on a few things." "Cutting back on fruit?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Mom, I love my mangoes, but you always taught me that eating fruits is healthy. What's going on?" Sarah sat down at the table, glancing at the colorful fruit salad. "Well," she began slowly, "I've been reading some studies, and they say that eating too many sugary fruits can actually contribute to muscle weakness, especially as we age. And I've been struggling with my legs." Jack's expression softened, and he nodded. "I get it, Mom. But you don't have to cut out fruit entirely. Maybe just reduce the sugar content in your meals." "Exactly," Sarah said. "I'm not giving up fruit. Just being more mindful of how much I eat. I think that's all I need." Dinner proceeded, and Sarah found herself enjoying the meal without feeling the need to overeat. She filled her plate with the quinoa salad and roasted vegetables, leaving the fruit salad to the side. At first, she thought it would be difficult to resist, but as she continued eating, she realized something surprising: the food didn't taste less satisfying. In fact, she felt more in control, more mindful of what she was putting into her body. She wasn't missing the extra sugar at all. Caroline, noticing her restraint, smiled and asked, "So, how's it been going, Mom? The diet change?" Sarah looked around the table at her family, her son, her daughter-in-law, and felt a rush of pride. They might not fully understand why she was making these changes, but they supported her nonetheless. "It's been a journey," Sarah said, "but I think I'm on the right path. My legs feel a little stronger each day. I'm taking it slow, one step at a time." "That's great, Mom," Jack said, reaching over to pat her hand. "We're proud of you." For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she was moving in the right direction. The road ahead would still have its obstacles, old habits would always be there, tempting her, but she had made a choice to move forward, to embrace change, and to rebuild her strength. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she had started her journey. And that was enough for now. The evening wrapped up with laughter and more conversation, and Sarah found herself walking back to her car with a sense of lightness in her steps. She was on a new path, one where she could take back control of her body and her life. There would be setbacks, there would be challenges, but Sarah was ready. She wasn't just changing her diet, she was changing the way she thought about herself and the life she still had ahead of her. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It had been a week since Sarah made her decision to start reducing her intake of certain fruits, and the physical changes she had hoped for seemed to be manifesting slowly, but surely. She still had moments of doubt, when she walked past the fruit section at the grocery store or when she saw a perfectly ripe banana on the counter, but for the most part, she was managing. Her legs felt slightly lighter, the stiffness that once plagued her every movement was starting to loosen, and there were moments in the day where she felt more energetic than she had in months. However, despite these small victories, there was an unsettling thought lingering in the back of her mind. Was this the right approach? Was she really making the right choice by cutting back on fruit? Or was she depriving herself of something that was essential to her health, her happiness? She could hear the conflicting voices of experts in her head, each one offering a different perspective on what she should do. That feeling of uncertainty came to a head one quiet afternoon. It was a Thursday, and Sarah had just finished a light walk around her neighborhood, nothing too strenuous, just enough to get her blood flowing. She walked back to her front porch and took a seat, letting the warmth of the late afternoon sun wash over her. It had been one of those days when everything felt a little clearer, a little more in place. But, as she sat down, she found herself scrolling through her phone, something she rarely did without purpose, and came across an article that shook her. The headline was simple, yet direct: "The Hidden Dangers of Sugar. Is your diet destroying your body's strength?" Curious, Sarah clicked on it, only to find that it was written by none other than Elon Musk's health team, the same group behind the controversial fruit research she had seen earlier. As she read the article, a knot began to form in her stomach. The article began with a stark statement: increased sugar intake, particularly from high-sugar fruits, accelerates muscle breakdown and increases inflammation in the body, especially in older adults. Sarah's heart raced as she continued reading, the familiar fear beginning to creep up on her. It confirmed everything she had feared, everything she had already started to suspect. She hadn't been imagining the correlation between the sugar and her muscle loss. But then, something caught her eye, a sentence buried at the end of the article that would change everything. Recent studies have shown that while fruit consumption is beneficial for many, its high-sugar varieties, like bananas, mangoes, and pineapples, may need to be reconsidered as the risks outweigh the benefits for some individuals, particularly those with existing mobility issues or age-related conditions. The word seemed to pulse on the screen. Reconsidered. Risks outweigh the benefits. Her mind began to swirl with a rush of emotions. She had already been cutting back, but now, reading this, she felt a sinking sense of dread. Was her love for fruit truly hurting her? All this time, had she been sabotaging herself, unknowingly causing more harm than good? Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, she felt defeated. What if I've been wrong this whole time? The weight of it all crashed down on her, the years of believing in something that might not have been true, the countless hours spent exercising and dieting, all of it seemingly for nothing. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Emily. "Hey Mom, how's it going? Just wanted to check in." With trembling hands, Sarah typed back, her thoughts in a jumbled mess. "I don't know, Emily. I just read something, and now I'm not sure what to believe anymore. I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe I've been wrong all along. My legs, my strength, everything's just a mess right now." Emily's reply came quickly: "Mom, don't stress. You're doing great. Just take it one step at a time, okay? You're already making progress, and that's what matters." Sarah took a deep breath, wiping away a tear. It was comforting to hear her daughter's voice, even if it was through a text. Emily always seemed to know how to ease her mind, even when Sarah couldn't quite make sense of her own thoughts. The truth was, Sarah wasn't ready to give up on her new approach, on this new path she had started to walk. She couldn't. But this new information had shaken her, made her question everything she thought she knew. She needed answers, real answers. Not just articles and studies that left more questions than they answered. She needed to speak with someone who could guide her through this confusion, someone who could help her figure out whether her efforts were leading her in the right direction. That night, Sarah called Dr. Matthews. She had been putting off this conversation for weeks, but now, it felt urgent. Dr. Matthews, I've been reading about the connection between fruit and muscle strength, and I don't know what to think anymore, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've been cutting back on fruit, and I think I'm seeing some improvement, but I keep wondering, am I doing the right thing? There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Dr. Matthews spoke. Sarah, I'm glad you called. I know you've been working hard on your health, and it's natural to seek out answers, especially when you're dealing with something as frustrating as muscle weakness. But is the fruit really the problem? Sarah interrupted, her voice shaky. Am I making my legs worse by eating the wrong things? I don't want to make a mistake. Dr. Matthews let out a slow breath, clearly taking a moment to think before responding. Sarah, it's not about fruit being inherently bad for you. In fact, fruit is a key part of a balanced diet. But here's the thing, as we age, our bodies change. Our ability to process sugar, even the natural sugars in fruit, becomes less efficient. Sarah listened, her heart starting to slow. So, it's not that fruit is bad, but I just need to be more mindful. Exactly, Dr. Matthews replied. You're on the right track by being mindful of your sugar intake. But don't think you have to cut out fruit entirely. You just need to find the balance that works for your body. And most importantly, keep focusing on strength-building exercises and staying active. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a sense of relief. The emotional turmoil that had taken hold of her began to dissipate. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't doomed to fail. There was still a way forward, still hope. You're right, Dr. Matthews, she said quietly. I'll keep working at it. I'm just scared sometimes, you know. I understand, he replied gently. Change is never easy, especially when it feels like there's so much on the line. But you're doing great, Sarah. Keep moving forward, and remember, you're not alone in this. The call ended, but Sarah sat there for a long time, letting his words settle in. She wasn't alone. She had a team of people supporting her, from Dr. Matthews to her family. And most importantly, she was starting to believe in herself again. She wasn't finished with her journey, there were still challenges ahead, but she had just taken a major step forward. Sarah woke up the next morning feeling a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in days. The previous evening's conversation with Dr. Matthews had left her with a renewed sense of clarity. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't spiraling into failure. She was simply adjusting, adapting to the changes in her body as she grew older, just as she had adjusted to so many other changes in her life. This was no different. She sat up in bed and stretched, feeling the slight stiffness in her legs but also a quiet strength. She was beginning to recognize that the journey she had embarked on wasn't just about the physical changes she was hoping for. It was about learning to listen to her body, being patient with herself, and allowing time for her muscles to regain their strength, even if it meant making difficult decisions about her diet. After a few moments, Sarah stood up and walked over to the kitchen. The sun was streaming in through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. She felt different today, lighter in spirit. The kitchen counter was still lined with fruit, but this time, it didn't feel like a temptation. It felt like a choice, a reminder that she was in control. She didn't reach for the mangoes or bananas today. Instead, she grabbed a few apples and added them to her breakfast. A modest portion, nothing extreme, but enough to give her body a balanced start to the day. There was no rush. No pressure to immediately overhaul everything. It was all about small, consistent changes that would lead to greater results over time. Her thoughts wandered back to her son, Jack. She had been worried about how he might react to the new changes in her diet. She didn't want him to think she was being extreme or obsessive. But when she had visited him last week and shared her journey, he had shown nothing but support. "You're doing great, Mom," Jack had said. "I'm proud of you for taking charge of your health." Those words had stuck with Sarah, and she had replayed them in her mind many times. It was strange, how such a simple affirmation could carry so much weight. It reminded her that she wasn't alone in this, that her family understood her and was behind her every step of the way. Sarah sipped her coffee and reflected on how far she had come. A few weeks ago, she had been unsure, uncertain of the path ahead. But now, she felt more grounded, more aware of her choices. The frustration she once felt over her body's changes had begun to transform into a sense of empowerment. The obstacles were still there, of course, but they no longer felt insurmountable. They were part of the process, part of the journey. Later that afternoon, Sarah decided to take a walk to the park. It had become part of her new routine, a small daily activity that gave her the chance to stretch her legs, breathe in the fresh air, and clear her mind. The air was crisp, and as she walked along the tree-lined path, she couldn't help but notice the way her legs moved more fluidly than they had in weeks. It wasn't perfect, there was still a bit of stiffness. But there was a noticeable difference. A strength she hadn't realized was slowly building. As she walked, Sarah reflected on her journey so far. The first few days had been difficult, temptation had been a constant companion, and the doubts had crept in more times than she cared to admit. But now, those moments of uncertainty felt like distant memories. She was on the right path, and each step, no matter how small, was bringing her closer to the strength she craved. By the time she returned home, Sarah was exhausted but satisfied. There was a sense of accomplishment in the simple act of moving her body, of taking control of her health. As she sat down to a simple lunch, grilled chicken, a side of roasted vegetables, and a small serving of avocado, she realized that she no longer felt like a victim of her circumstances. She felt like an active participant in her own well-being. Later that evening, she received a call from Emily. "Hey, Mom, how's everything going?" Emily's voice was upbeat, filled with that same optimism that had always been a source of comfort for Sarah. "I'm doing well, sweetie," Sarah replied, smiling. "It's been a good day. I'm sticking to my plan, and it's starting to feel easier." "That's great to hear," Emily said. "I know you were worried at first, but you've got this, Mom. I'm really proud of you." Sarah's heart swelled with warmth. She had always wanted to be a source of strength for Emily, and hearing her daughter's pride filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. "Thanks, Emily. That means a lot. Honestly, I think I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's not just about the food. It's about how I take care of myself, how I move forward. It's a process." "It really is," Emily agreed. "But you've already made so much progress. I know this is just the beginning." They chatted for a while longer, sharing stories and laughing together, and by the end of the conversation, Sarah felt a renewed sense of peace. Yes, the journey ahead was still uncertain, and yes, there would be times of struggle, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned an important lesson in the last few weeks: progress wasn't always linear, and that was okay. It was the willingness to keep going, even when it felt difficult, that made all the difference. As Sarah finished her dinner and began to tidy up the kitchen, she realized something important. She had changed. Not just her diet, but her perspective, her approach to health, and even her relationship with her body. She had learned to embrace the idea of gradual change, of making small but meaningful adjustments that would add up over time. And that was the key to lasting success. As she washed the dishes, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. For her family, for her health, and for the journey she had started. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And that, she realized, was enough. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. She wasn't just getting back her strength, she was reclaiming her life. Sarah woke up to another bright morning, the sun pouring through the windows of her bedroom. She had gotten into the habit of waking up early, no longer the groggy, sluggish morning she had grown used to, but rather a sense of calm anticipation for the day ahead. For the first time in weeks, she felt rested. Refreshed. She knew there were still hurdles ahead, but something about her small victories so far had given her confidence. She stood up from the bed, stretching gently, and felt her legs. There was still some stiffness, but it wasn't nearly as bad as before. Each morning, the pain in her muscles seemed to dissipate a little more. Each day, the soreness felt less like an enemy and more like a sign of progress. These were small wins, but Sarah knew they were victories worth celebrating. After a quick breakfast, she decided to get outside for another walk, one of the daily routines that had become so important. When she stepped out the door, the cool morning air greeted her, carrying with it a feeling of possibility. As she walked along the familiar path in the park, Sarah's thoughts drifted to all the changes she had made. It wasn't just about the food anymore, although she was proud of her commitment to eating better. It wasn't even about the exercise routine that had gradually become a part of her day. It was the mindset shift that had truly made the difference. She wasn't fixating on perfection. She wasn't overwhelmed by the idea of making a complete 180. Instead, she had embraced the idea of small steps, one after the other. The first few days of cutting back on fruits like bananas, mangoes, and pineapples had been filled with doubt. The sudden changes in her diet had left her wondering if she was making a mistake, if she was doing enough. But now, those doubts were starting to fade. She could feel the difference in her body. It was subtle, but it was there. Her legs felt stronger, her energy more consistent throughout the day. And all of it was the result of those small changes. It was amazing how something so simple, just cutting back on a few high-sugar fruits, could create a ripple effect of positive change. As she continued walking, Sarah couldn't help but notice how her mood had improved as well. She wasn't constantly frustrated with her body anymore. She wasn't gripped by guilt for indulging in something that wasn't good for her. The idea of balance was slowly sinking in. She could eat the food she loved without feeling like she was sabotaging her progress. She could enjoy life and still take care of herself. When she reached the park bench at the end of the path, Sarah sat down and took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She could hear the birds chirping in the trees above her and the distant hum of traffic in the background. The world seemed calm and steady, much like she was beginning to feel. It was then that her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her peaceful moment. She pulled it out to see a message from Emily. "Mom, how's the walk today?" Sarah smiled at the text and replied, "Great. Legs feel better, and the air's perfect today. You know, I've been thinking a lot about how these little wins are making such a difference. It's like, all the little things are adding up." Emily's response came quickly. "I knew you'd get it. Small steps, Mom. It's the little things that really matter in the end." Sarah paused, reflecting on Emily's words. How often had she overlooked those small wins in the past? How many times had she thought that change had to be sudden or drastic for it to count? She had always wanted quick results, instant gratification. But now, she understood that real, lasting change wasn't about jumping from one extreme to the next. It was about consistency. It was about showing up for herself every day. She finished her walk and returned home, ready to start the day. The rest of her morning went smoothly. She made herself a nutritious lunch, focusing on incorporating more whole foods, grilled chicken, mixed greens, and a small serving of avocado. As she ate, she found herself reflecting again on her journey. A few months ago, Sarah would have never imagined that she'd be in this place. She'd been consumed by the idea that there were only certain ways to achieve health. That if she wasn't doing everything at once, she was failing. But now, she realized that the pressure she had put on herself was unnecessary. The key was in understanding her body, listening to its needs, and making adjustments along the way. There was no perfect solution, no one-size-fits-all answer. The beauty was in the process. After lunch, Sarah decided to take a break and go through some of her old photos. She came across a picture from a few years ago, one taken during a family vacation. She was smiling, standing next to Emily and Jack, both of them looking happy and carefree. Sarah studied the photo, a mixture of nostalgia and pride filling her heart. She remembered how active she had been then, how effortlessly she moved and explored. But she also remembered the subtle discomfort she had felt in her legs, the way she had occasionally had to pause and take a breather. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. It had been easy to push through. But looking at the photo now, Sarah realized just how far she had come. The aches and pains she had ignored back then had only worsened over time. She had allowed herself to believe that those moments of discomfort were just part of getting older, that they were inevitable. But now, she knew better. Now, she understood that she could make a change. She could take control of her health in ways that would make a real difference. The next few days passed with similar small wins. Each walk, each healthy meal, each decision to rest when her body needed it, these were all part of the foundation Sarah was building for herself. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when old habits crept back in. But each time that happened, Sarah recognized it for what it was, a challenge, not a failure. In the evenings, she often found herself reflecting on her day, taking stock of the little victories. The times when she said no to something she would have once indulged in. The moments when she pushed herself a little harder, whether it was walking a bit further or lifting a slightly heavier weight. These small acts of self-care were her victories. They were the key to her transformation. And while she still had much to learn, Sarah had come to realize that the real power lay not in achieving perfection, but in the consistency of small wins. It was the daily commitment to herself, the little steps forward, that would ultimately lead her to her goals. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, Sarah felt at peace with where she was. She wasn't rushing toward an end point anymore. She was simply living, growing, and improving, one small step at a time. The following week, Sarah woke up to the familiar warmth of the sun streaming in through her window. But today, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the promise of another beautiful day, it was the slight unease in her chest, a feeling she hadn't had in a while. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it was there, a quiet, nagging worry. Her progress so far had been steady. The pain in her legs had gradually decreased, and the muscle strength was returning, albeit slowly. The small victories she had celebrated, the walks, the healthy meals, the positive feedback from her family, had given her hope and confidence. But now, the doubt was creeping back in. What if things didn't keep improving? What if she hit a wall? What if, after all this, the effort she had put into changing her diet and exercise routine wasn't enough? As Sarah lay in bed for a moment longer, trying to shake off the anxiety, she heard the phone buzz beside her. It was a message from Emily. "Good morning, Mom. How's the day looking?" The simple message brought a smile to Sarah's face, and she quickly typed back, "Good morning, sweetie. Feeling a little off today, but I'm sure it's nothing. Just one of those days." Emily responded almost instantly. "I get that. It's okay, Mom. You've been doing so well. Don't let the small things get you down. Remember, it's all part of the process. Even setbacks aren't failures, they're just part of the learning curve." Sarah reread Emily's message a few times. Even setbacks aren't failures, they're just part of the learning curve. It was such a simple sentiment, but hearing it from her daughter made it feel like a revelation. Setbacks. That was it. The fear she had been holding on to wasn't about failing, it was about the fear of things not moving forward as smoothly as they had been. Taking a deep breath, Sarah got out of bed. She knew she had to face this head-on. The day couldn't start if she was paralyzed by worry. By the time she had her morning coffee, Sarah had worked through some of her thoughts. Yes, there were bound to be days where progress didn't come as easily. Yes, there would be setbacks. But that didn't mean she was failing. It didn't mean she had to stop. It simply meant she had to adjust her approach and keep going. After all, wasn't that what she had been doing all along? Adjusting. Taking things one day at a time, one step at a time. She had learned that success wasn't about getting it right every single time, it was about persistence. The key to lasting change was learning how to get back up after a fall. With this renewed perspective, Sarah decided to keep moving forward. She pulled on her sneakers, grabbed her jacket, and stepped outside for her morning walk. The crisp air greeted her like an old friend, and as she walked, she focused on the rhythm of her steps, the movement of her legs, the gentle burn in her muscles, the steady beat of her heart. The act of walking was no longer a challenge. It had become a grounding ritual, one that helped her reset her mind and body. As she walked, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The previous months had been filled with doubts, fears, and moments of frustration. She had questioned whether she was doing enough, if she was on the right path, and if all her efforts would truly pay off. But now, she was beginning to see that the key was in persistence, not perfection. She reached the park and sat down on a bench, gazing out over the quiet landscape. The trees were beginning to bud, signaling the arrival of spring. The world around her was full of life, full of change. It was the perfect metaphor for her own journey. Growth took time. There were seasons of struggle, seasons of growth, and seasons of rest. And no season was permanent. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a text from Jack. "Mom, are you still on track with everything? How's it going?" Sarah smiled as she typed back, "It's been a bit of a rough morning, but I'm hanging in there. You know, I've realized that even when things don't go as planned, that doesn't mean I'm not progressing. I've been afraid of setbacks, but I think I've been misunderstanding them." Jack's reply came quickly. "You're doing amazing, Mom. Don't stress about the bumps in the road. They're part of the process. And I'm proud of you. Keep going, one step at a time." His words resonated with her. It was a pattern she was beginning to notice. Her family, Jack, Emily, and even Dr. Matthews, had all spoken the same language. The language of persistence. The language of understanding that setbacks didn't define success, they were simply part of the journey. Sarah stood up from the bench, feeling lighter. The weight of fear and doubt had lifted, and she knew exactly what she needed to do. She needed to focus on what she could control, and let go of the rest. She didn't need to have all the answers today. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to keep moving forward. When she returned home, Sarah made herself a lunch of quinoa, grilled chicken, and steamed vegetables. The food was nourishing, and as she ate, she felt proud of the choices she had made. No, it wasn't always easy. No, it wasn't always perfect. But the small wins were adding up. She was taking charge of her health in a way she hadn't in years. And that was something to be proud of. That afternoon, Sarah decided to try something new. She had been doing short walks, but she wanted to push herself a little further. She didn't expect to break any records or feel like she was invincible, she just wanted to prove to herself that she could take on a bigger challenge, even if it meant facing a little discomfort. As she walked, she felt the familiar burn in her legs, the muscles reminding her that she was still building strength. But this time, instead of feeling frustrated, she smiled. She knew this burn wasn't a sign of failure. It was a sign that she was working hard. That she was pushing herself, and that was exactly what she needed. By the time she returned home, sweat beading on her forehead and muscles sore, Sarah knew she had just crossed a threshold. She had stepped outside her comfort zone and emerged stronger for it. And that, she realized, was the beauty of the process. Progress wasn't linear. There were ups and downs, and setbacks would always be a part of the journey. But as long as she kept going, as long as she kept trying, those setbacks would never be the end of the road. They would just be another part of the learning curve. The week had been going well for Sarah. Her routine was in full swing, and while there were moments of frustration, overall, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. The walks were becoming easier, her meals were balanced, and she was feeling more energetic throughout the day. There was a sense of confidence that came with knowing she was making real progress, one day at a time. But life, as it often does, had a way of throwing in a curveball just when things were looking up. It was mid-morning when Sarah received the phone call. She had just finished her walk around the park and was sitting at her kitchen table, enjoying a cup of green tea, when her phone rang. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. It was Dr. Matthews. "Hello." Sarah answered, trying to steady her voice. "Sarah, hi. It's Dr. Matthews. I've got your lab results back, and I wanted to go over them with you," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Okay," Sarah felt a twinge of anxiety. "What's going on?" "There are some things we need to discuss," he replied. "I don't want to alarm you, but I'm seeing some changes in your blood work that we need to address. It looks like your cholesterol levels are higher than we'd like. And there's a slight increase in your blood sugar as well. Nothing too alarming yet, but if we don't take action, it could lead to more serious health concerns." Sarah's heart sank. She had been making such great progress, eating better, walking more, and feeling stronger. How could this be happening? Why weren't the changes she was making enough? "Dr. Matthews, I don't understand. I've been doing everything you suggested. I've been cutting out sugar, walking every day, eating healthy meals. Why is this happening?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I understand, Sarah," he said gently. "Sometimes, even with the best efforts, these things take time to show results. Your body is adjusting, and it's going to take a bit longer for these numbers to reflect the changes you've made. But don't be discouraged. This is just another challenge to tackle, and we can work through it together." The words, "don't be discouraged," hung in the air. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that everything she was doing was enough. But doubt crept back into her mind, the same old voice that whispered, "Maybe you're not doing enough. Maybe you'll never get it right." "I appreciate you telling me this," Sarah said quietly, trying to hold back tears. I don't know what to do now." Dr. Matthews paused for a moment. "Listen, I'm not saying you failed. Far from it. You've made significant changes, and they're having an impact, even if it's not showing up on the lab results just yet. What we'll need to do now is take it a step further. We'll adjust your diet slightly and incorporate some more intense exercise, and then we'll monitor your progress." Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Okay. I can do that." "Great," Dr. Matthews said. "We'll schedule a follow-up appointment in a few weeks to see how you're doing. In the meantime, don't get discouraged. You're on the right path. I'm here to help." As Sarah hung up the phone, she stared at it for a long moment. The weight of the conversation settled in. Her progress felt small now, overshadowed by this new obstacle. The lab results were a wake-up call, a reminder that health wasn't just about what she did in the moment, it was a long-term journey. The doubt that had been lingering in the back of her mind suddenly felt much louder. Was she doing enough? Was she going to see the results she hoped for, or was it all a waste of effort? She sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty cup of tea in front of her. The peaceful morning she had enjoyed just an hour ago now felt like a distant memory. The familiar fear of failure began to creep in, and for a moment, Sarah considered giving up. But then, something shifted inside her. A quiet voice reminded her of everything she had already achieved. The progress she had made was real, even if it wasn't reflected in the blood work yet. She had walked further than she had in years. She had learned to nourish her body in new ways. She had developed strength, not just physically, but mentally. She had done hard things before, and she could do hard things again. The fear of setbacks had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, but it didn't have to stop her. The fear of not being enough didn't have to control her. If there was anything she had learned on this journey, it was that it wasn't the setbacks that defined her, it was how she responded to them. She wasn't going to let this be the thing that stopped her. She would face this challenge, just like all the others, with the same persistence, the same courage. And this time, she would do it with a new perspective. Setbacks weren't failures. They were simply opportunities to adjust, to learn, and to keep moving forward. That afternoon, Sarah put her shoes on and stepped outside. The walk was going to be a little different today. She wasn't just walking for the sake of her health, she was walking to remind herself of her strength. She was walking to prove to herself that this challenge wasn't the end. It was just another part of the journey. As her feet hit the pavement, Sarah found a rhythm in her stride. Each step felt solid and purposeful. She was taking control, one step at a time. There would be more obstacles ahead, of course. There would be more setbacks, more challenges. But she knew now that she had the strength to face them. When Sarah returned home, sweaty but determined, she pulled out her notebook and jotted down a few thoughts. She wrote about the fear, the uncertainty, but also about the resolve she had found in herself. The path wasn't linear. There would be ups and downs, but as long as she kept going, she would get there. No matter how long it took. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next morning, Sarah woke up with a feeling of clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. Despite the unsettling phone call from Dr. Matthews, despite the doubts that had tried to settle in, she realized something important: she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. The challenges weren't easy, but they were shaping her into someone more resilient, more determined, and more aware of her own strength than ever before. She stretched in bed, feeling the soft pull of her muscles, and allowed herself a deep breath. There was something empowering about taking each day as it came, finding peace in the small victories, and knowing that even when things didn't go according to plan, she had the strength to adapt and keep going. Her morning routine had become second nature by now. She went through the motions of getting dressed, preparing breakfast, and mentally preparing herself for the day ahead. She was still processing the conversation with Dr. Matthews, but today, it didn't feel as overwhelming. She had learned that it was okay to take a step back, reassess, and then take the next step forward, no matter how small it seemed. As Sarah sat down at her kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal, she couldn't help but reflect on the months that had passed. From the initial struggles with pain, to the emotional hurdles of accepting that her body wasn't where she wanted it to be, to the gradual but steady progress she had made, each moment had been a stepping stone, leading her closer to the woman she was becoming. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was Emily, as if on cue. "Good morning, Mom. How's today looking?" Sarah smiled as she typed back, "Feeling a little better today, sweetie. Getting back into the groove of things. Sometimes setbacks are just reminders to slow down and adjust, right?" Emily's response was instant. "Exactly. You've been doing great, Mom. A little bump in the road isn't the end of the journey. You're still on the right path." Those simple words from Emily brought a surge of strength to Sarah's chest. She was right. A bump in the road wasn't the end of the journey, it was just a pause. She had faced worse, and each time, she had risen stronger. That's the way life worked. Challenges came, but they didn't define you. Your response to those challenges did. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah decided that today would be different. She had been working hard, but now it was time to take things to the next level. She knew she needed to incorporate more intense exercise into her routine, as Dr. Matthews had suggested, but she also needed to listen to her body. It wasn't about pushing herself to the brink. It was about balance, strength, and consistency. The day before, during her walk, Sarah had noticed a small hill in the distance, one she had always avoided. It seemed like a challenge, but today, it didn't feel impossible. She had avoided it for so long because she didn't think she could handle the incline, but now, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to prove to herself that she could do hard things. She grabbed her water bottle and set out for the park, her footsteps lighter than they had been in days. The morning air was cool and refreshing, and as she made her way to the foot of the hill, Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't sure if she would make it to the top, but the point wasn't the destination, it was the effort. It was the courage to try something new, to step out of her comfort zone. Sarah started the climb at a steady pace, focusing on her breathing, keeping her legs moving in rhythm. The incline was steeper than she had expected, and her heart rate quickened as she pushed forward. For a moment, doubt flickered, was she pushing too hard? Was she overdoing it? But then, she remembered something, it wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. And progress, no matter how small, was worth celebrating. She reached the halfway point, and though her legs were beginning to burn, she refused to stop. She looked out over the park, the view offering a beautiful, sweeping panorama of the landscape. The sun was beginning to rise higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the path. It was a peaceful moment, a reminder that the world was bigger than any single challenge, no matter how daunting it seemed. With renewed determination, Sarah took a few more steps. She was getting closer. Her legs burned, but her heart felt stronger than ever. And just as she thought she might need to stop, she took the final few steps and reached the top of the hill. She stood there for a moment, catching her breath, feeling the weight of the accomplishment settle over her. She had done it. She had faced a challenge that once seemed insurmountable and conquered it. The sense of pride that filled her chest was almost overwhelming. She had doubted herself, feared the challenge, and almost turned back, but in the end, she had finished. And in that moment, Sarah realized something profound: the challenges, the obstacles, the moments of doubt, they weren't just tests of her physical strength. They were tests of her mental and emotional resilience. They were opportunities for growth. As she made her way back down the hill, Sarah smiled. She had taken a big step forward today, literally and figuratively. It wasn't just about the physical strength she was building. It was about the emotional strength, the mental fortitude, and the unwavering belief that, no matter what, she could keep going. The setbacks, the obstacles, the fears, they didn't have to control her. She controlled how she responded to them. That evening, as Sarah sat down for dinner with Jack and Emily, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The meal was simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a small side of quinoa, but to her, it was a reminder of how far she had come. The food nourished her body, and the conversations around the table nourished her soul. Jack smiled at her, noticing the glow of accomplishment in her eyes. "How was the walk today, Mom?" Sarah met his gaze, her heart swelling with pride. "I climbed a hill." Emily raised her eyebrows. "A hill? You?" "Yep," Sarah said with a grin. "It wasn't easy, but I did it. And it felt amazing." "That's amazing, Mom," Jack said. "I'm so proud of you." Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of their support surrounding her. This was the strength she had been building, the strength to face the challenges, to rise up when things got tough, and to keep moving forward, no matter what. She knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more setbacks to navigate. But with each step, she was becoming more and more confident in herself and in the process. Because this time, she understood something fundamental: strength wasn't about never facing challenges, it was about how you rose when you did. And Sarah was rising, one step at a time. Sarah's journey had been anything but linear. For every victory, there seemed to be a new challenge waiting just around the corner. But with each challenge, she was learning something invaluable: patience. And not just with her body, but with herself. The phone call from Dr. Matthews still lingered in her thoughts, but she was trying not to let it define her progress. Instead of dwelling on the fact that her blood work hadn't improved as much as she'd hoped, she focused on the small wins, the moments when she noticed a little more flexibility, a little more strength, and a lot more resilience than she had before. Today, Sarah woke up with a quiet sense of determination. She had planned to tackle another part of her fitness regimen, strength training. While walking had become a routine part of her day, she knew she needed to challenge her muscles in new ways to keep building strength. The thought of using weights intimidated her, but she had seen the results from people she admired. People who had dedicated themselves to their physical health, and she knew that if they could do it, so could she. Sarah had always found comfort in routines, but it was time for a new challenge. After her usual breakfast of oatmeal with flaxseed and fresh berries, she changed into workout clothes and went down to her home gym. The gym was nothing fancy, a few dumbbells, a yoga mat, and a resistance band, but it was enough for Sarah to start building strength in ways she hadn't before. She had learned that each journey toward better health wasn't about jumping from one milestone to the next at a rapid pace. It was about being patient, understanding that true transformation took time. It wasn't always visible immediately, but the changes were happening beneath the surface, in ways she couldn't yet see. Before Sarah even picked up a weight, she took a few moments to mentally prepare herself. She had started doing this before each workout. She closed her eyes, took deep breaths, and visualized her success. Not the success of the perfect body or the perfect number on the scale, but the success of simply showing up, of continuing to make the effort day after day. She reached for the lightest dumbbells, unsure of what weight would feel right. She didn't want to push too hard, she had learned that lesson the hard way, but she didn't want to go too easy on herself either. Finding the balance was key. As Sarah began with basic bicep curls, her muscles shook slightly. The weights felt heavier than she expected, and her mind began to wander. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't do it? But she quickly snapped herself out of the doubt. She had overcome so much already, this was just one more step. She pushed through the shaking, focusing on her breathing, reminding herself that she was strong enough to handle this. Every rep, no matter how small, was a victory. After completing 3 sets of bicep curls, Sarah moved to other exercises, shoulder presses, squats, and resistance band exercises. With each move, she felt her body grow stronger, even if it was just a little bit at a time. It wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. She smiled to herself as she realized how far she had come. By the end of her workout, Sarah was drenched in sweat. Her muscles were sore, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that was unlike anything she had felt before. It wasn't just about completing the workout, it was about showing herself that she could do hard things. That, despite the setbacks, despite the doubts, she was still moving forward. As she sat on the mat to cool down, Sarah thought about her earlier conversation with Emily. Patience. It was something she was learning every day. Patience with her body, patience with the process, and patience with herself. She wasn't going to reach her destination overnight, and that was okay. Each small step, each small effort, was one step closer to where she wanted to be. The next few days were filled with more strength training and longer walks. Sarah was slowly but surely getting stronger. The muscle soreness was a reminder that her body was working hard, and each day, she noticed improvements in her stamina. She was more energized, her movements were smoother, and even her posture had improved. But it wasn't just the physical changes that were significant. It was the emotional and mental growth that was beginning to show itself. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she was doing everything she could. And, even more importantly, she was doing it for herself. There was no external pressure to look a certain way or achieve some impossible standard. She was doing it for her health, for her well-being, and for her own sense of empowerment. One evening, after a long day of work, Sarah sat down with a glass of water, feeling the familiar sense of exhaustion that always followed a good workout. But this time, she wasn't drained in the way she used to be. This time, she felt fulfilled, like the work she had put in had created something stronger within her. Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from Jack. "Mom, you're looking stronger every time I see you. Keep it up." Sarah smiled at the message. The support from her family meant everything. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. They saw the progress she was making, even when she couldn't always see it herself. It was the little things, like their words of encouragement, that kept her going. Sarah replied, "Thanks, Jack. I'm doing my best. It's slow, but it's worth it." As she put her phone down, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had been hard on herself at times, constantly comparing her progress to others or questioning whether she was doing enough. But now, she saw that the journey was unique to her. It wasn't about how quickly she reached the end, it was about the persistence, the growth, and the lessons learned along the way. The next morning, as Sarah laced up her shoes for another walk, she felt a renewed sense of confidence. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to have it all figured out right away. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing the best she could with each passing day. As she stepped outside into the crisp morning air, she smiled to herself. She had learned a vital lesson on this journey: patience was the key to lasting transformation. It wasn't about doing it all at once, it was about the small, consistent steps that would eventually add up to something incredible. And so, Sarah walked on, knowing that, as long as she stayed committed to herself and trusted the process, she was destined to reach the destination she had always dreamed of, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah felt herself growing more confident in her abilities. The patience she had cultivated in herself began to reflect in her daily life. Whether it was in the gym, with her family, or in her personal reflections, Sarah had embraced a new rhythm. It wasn't the rush of achieving instant success, but the steady and consistent progress that gave her peace. However, just as she began to feel like she was finally finding her stride, life threw her an unexpected challenge. It wasn't a physical obstacle this time, but an emotional one. It started one morning when Sarah received an email that left her feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. The subject line read, "Health insurance changes and appointment rescheduling." Her stomach churned as she opened the message. The email explained that due to recent budget cuts, her health insurance provider would no longer cover some of her medical treatments, including the physical therapy she had been receiving. Her heart sank as she scrolled through the details. Without this support, she was worried she might not be able to continue the progress she had worked so hard to make. Sarah's mind raced. She had put so much effort into her physical health, had dedicated herself to making positive changes. But now, this felt like a huge setback. She had been depending on the therapy sessions to help her rebuild her strength and flexibility. Without them, how could she continue to move forward? She stared at the email for several minutes, unsure of what to do. Her mind felt clouded with doubt. It was hard to avoid feeling defeated in that moment. After all, she had already faced so many struggles, could she really push through this new obstacle? But as Sarah leaned back in her chair, she took a deep breath. She had faced challenges before, and while this was discouraging, she wasn't ready to give up. There had to be another way to move forward. It might require some creative thinking, but she had learned that nothing worthwhile ever came easy. Instead of dwelling on the frustration of the email, Sarah reached for her phone and called Emily. Her daughter had been a pillar of support throughout this journey, always offering words of encouragement. Maybe Emily would have some insight into how Sarah could handle this new roadblock. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah said when Emily picked up. "I just got some upsetting news about my health insurance, and I'm feeling a little lost right now." Emily's voice softened instantly. "What happened, Mom?" Sarah explained the situation, and she could almost hear the wheels turning in Emily's mind on the other end of the phone. "That's tough, Mom. But I know you're not someone who lets things like this stop you," Emily said. "What about reaching out to Dr. Matthews or another physical therapist? Maybe they know of alternative options that are more affordable or can offer some guidance. I know it's frustrating, but you're resourceful. You've already come so far." Emily's words were exactly what Sarah needed to hear. It was easy to fall into a spiral of negativity, but Emily reminded her that she had the ability to adapt and find new solutions. Sarah wasn't helpless in this situation, she could keep pushing forward. The next day, Sarah made an appointment to speak with Dr. Matthews. While she was nervous about how the conversation might go, she knew she had to explore every option. She couldn't let this setback derail everything she had worked for. Dr. Matthews was understanding, as always, and reassured Sarah that there were still other options available. He suggested she look into local community health programs that offered physical therapy at a lower cost or, in some cases, free of charge. He also recommended some at-home exercises that would help her stay on track while she figured out the insurance situation. "Sarah," Dr. Matthews said kindly, "this is just a temporary roadblock. You're doing amazing, and we'll find a way to keep this momentum going. Trust me, you're not in this alone." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't expected such a positive response, but Dr. Matthews' confidence in her helped reignite her own belief. She was reminded once again that she had a support network, a real, tangible network that extended beyond her immediate family. The following weeks were filled with phone calls to local clinics, research into community health programs, and some trial and error. Sarah found a physical therapy program at a community center near her home that was affordable and offered a payment plan. It wasn't exactly the same as her previous sessions, but it was a step in the right direction. The exercises she was given also complemented the strength training she was doing on her own, providing a sense of continuity that calmed her nerves. Throughout this process, Sarah realized how much she had learned to rely on her community, her family, her healthcare providers, and even her friends. At one point, Jack had even suggested that she reach out to his friend, Matt, who had experience in physical fitness. Matt had offered to meet with Sarah once a week for a few strength training sessions, providing her with additional guidance at no cost. It was another reminder that people truly wanted to help when they saw you trying to help yourself. Sarah's physical therapy sessions at the community center weren't without their challenges. The exercises were different, and the atmosphere wasn't as comfortable as the private clinic she had grown accustomed to. But the more she stuck with it, the more she realized that these changes were part of her journey, not setbacks, but necessary adaptations that were pushing her to grow. Her body ached in new ways, but this time, it wasn't discouraging. It was a reminder that she was still progressing, still working hard. With every step, every rep, every stretch, Sarah was laying the foundation for a healthier future. It was during one of her physical therapy sessions that she had another breakthrough moment. She was struggling with an exercise that involved balancing on one leg while holding a weight in her hand. Her legs wobbled, and she felt herself losing focus. Frustration crept in. Why can't I do this? But just as she was about to put the weight down in defeat, the physical therapist, Sarah's new ally, gently encouraged her. It's okay to fall. It's okay to struggle. What matters is that you get back up. Those words, simple as they were, resonated deeply with Sarah. It wasn't just about getting the exercise right or perfecting each movement. It was about showing up every single day, falling down, and getting back up. That was strength. Later that night, Sarah shared her experience with Jack and Emily over dinner. I had a moment today where I almost gave up on an exercise. But I realized something: strength isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. Emily smiled. You're exactly right, Mom. We're all here to help you keep going. And you've got this. As Sarah looked at her family, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road was never going to be smooth, but she was learning to navigate it, one step at a time. And with the support of the people around her, she knew she would face whatever came next with the same resilience she had shown so far. Sarah's daily routine had gradually become more than just a commitment, it had evolved into a way of life. With every passing week, she felt herself transforming not only physically but emotionally and mentally. Her journey wasn't always smooth, but she was learning that the setbacks, no matter how frustrating, were just temporary obstacles. The real victory lay in her ability to keep going despite the challenges. One afternoon, as Sarah was wrapping up a walk around the neighborhood, she noticed a subtle shift in the way her body responded to the activity. Her feet didn't ache as much. Her breathing was more controlled. The weight of her legs, which used to feel like they were dragging her down, felt lighter. She smiled to herself as she reached the front door of her house. These small changes weren't groundbreaking, but they were undeniable, and they meant something. That evening, as she sat down to her usual dinner of grilled chicken, quinoa, and steamed vegetables, Sarah reflected on the progress she had made. It hadn't been an easy road, and there were days when she felt like giving up. But now, after months of hard work, she could see the results, both in her physical strength and her inner resilience. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Emily. "Mom, how's the new program going? I know you've been working hard, and I just wanted to check in." Sarah's fingers hovered over the screen as she typed back a quick response. "It's going great. I'm feeling stronger every day. Honestly, it's been tough at times, but I'm proud of how far I've come. I'm just taking it one day at a time." She set the phone down and took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. One day at a time. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was hers. And each day she chose to push forward, even on the days that felt like the hardest, was a victory. She was learning that strength wasn't just about the big milestones, it was about celebrating the small wins, the tiny improvements that added up over time. That thought brought her back to a conversation she'd had with Jack a few days earlier. He had been telling her about a new project at work and how he'd been feeling a bit overwhelmed by the pressure. But in the middle of their chat, Jack had shared something that stuck with her. "You know, Mom," Jack had said, "sometimes it's easy to look at the big picture and get discouraged. You think about everything you have to do and it feels impossible. But then I remind myself to take it one step at a time. And before I know it, the work starts to get done." It had been a simple statement, but one that resonated with Sarah more than she had expected. It was a reminder that life, like her journey to better health, didn't need to be about rushing to the finish line. It was about embracing the process and finding joy in the small steps along the way. The next morning, as Sarah prepared for her daily walk, she found herself feeling a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt before. For the first time in months, she wasn't focused on the destination. Instead, she was looking forward to the process, the rhythm of her steps, the feeling of the cool breeze against her skin, the sound of her breath in the quiet of the morning. She didn't need to rush to reach the end of the block. She was content to be present in each moment. After a brisk 30-minute walk, Sarah felt that familiar sense of accomplishment. It was only a small part of her day, but it was a part she was learning to cherish. She could feel her muscles working harder with each stride, her heart pumping stronger with each beat. As she walked back toward her house, she felt the joy of knowing she was investing in herself, one step at a time. Later that day, Sarah attended one of her new physical therapy sessions at the community center. This time, the therapist introduced a new set of exercises designed to improve her balance and strengthen her core. Some of the movements felt awkward at first, and Sarah found herself struggling to maintain proper form. But she refused to let frustration take over. Instead, she focused on the small victories, the little moments when she nailed a move, when her body felt a little more in sync. After her session, Sarah sat in the car for a few minutes, catching her breath and reflecting on what had just happened. It had been a challenging workout, but she had made it through. More than that, she had learned something valuable about herself. She wasn't afraid of the struggle anymore. The discomfort no longer meant failure, it was a sign that she was growing. On her drive home, she received a call from Dr. Matthews. He had been checking in on her progress after her most recent appointment. As Sarah shared her updates and her feelings about the journey, she could hear the pride in Dr. Matthews' voice. "Sarah, you're doing an incredible job. It's clear that you're putting in the work, and I can see the results. I know this isn't easy, but the consistency you've shown is what's going to lead to lasting change. His words warmed her heart, but what really stuck with Sarah was the reminder that consistency was the key. It wasn't the grand gestures or the dramatic moments that mattered most. It was the small, daily actions, those were what built the foundation for long-term success. When she arrived home, Sarah decided to take a few minutes to reflect on her journey. She grabbed a notebook she had started using at the beginning of her physical transformation and began writing down some thoughts. In the past, she had been quick to judge herself, to focus on what wasn't going right or what she still hadn't achieved. But today, she wrote about the victories, both big and small. I walked for 30 minutes today, and I didn't feel like stopping halfway through. I held a plank for 45 seconds longer than last week. I ate a balanced meal that fueled me rather than draining me. And, most importantly, I showed up. The small wins were adding up, and Sarah was starting to see them more clearly. She no longer felt the pressure to measure her success against anyone else's standards. Her progress was her own, and it was more than enough. That night, she shared her reflections with Emily. "I've been thinking a lot about small wins lately," Sarah said. "It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but I'm learning to appreciate the little things. The steps I'm taking today are building the life I want tomorrow." Emily replied, "Mom, you're so right. Sometimes, we all need to slow down and celebrate the little wins, because they really add up. And from where I'm standing, you're doing amazing." Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of pride that came from within. She had embraced the power of small wins, and in doing so, she had found a renewed sense of purpose. This journey wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. And with every step, she was moving closer to the woman she wanted to be. As she settled into bed that night, Sarah felt more peaceful than she had in a long time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. One step at a time, one win at a time, she was becoming the best version of herself. Weeks passed, and Sarah's new routine had become a stable part of her life. The rhythm of her day, the consistency of her walks, her physical therapy sessions, and her commitment to a healthy diet were no longer just tasks she checked off. They had become integral to who she was becoming, a woman who no longer accepted defeat but rather confronted it with strength and resilience. Yet, despite this newfound sense of control, Sarah found herself nearing a tipping point. It all started one afternoon, when Sarah was at the community center for her physical therapy session. Her therapist, Mr. Thompson, had introduced a new series of exercises to test her limits. Sarah was excited at first, eager to push her boundaries. However, as she went through the movements, she quickly realized how difficult they were. The core strengthening exercises were more demanding than anything she'd done before, and halfway through the set, her muscles began to tremble with exhaustion. "Keep going, Sarah. You've got this," Mr. Thompson encouraged. But Sarah couldn't focus on his words. She was overwhelmed by a sudden wave of frustration. "Why is this so hard? I've been working so hard, why does it feel like I'm getting worse, not better?" Her mind raced as the exhaustion in her muscles spread to her spirit. The burning in her arms, the stiffness in her legs, it all felt like a reminder that no matter how much effort she put in, the progress was slow, too slow. She felt defeated, not just physically, but mentally as well. She wanted to break down, to give up. "Sarah." Mr. Thompson's voice snapped her out of her spiraling thoughts. "How are you feeling?" She hesitated, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to seem weak, but she also couldn't pretend everything was okay. I think I'm done for today," she said, her voice shaky. Mr. Thompson looked at her with a concerned but understanding expression. "It's okay to take a step back when things get overwhelming. Sometimes, the body and the mind need a break. But don't let frustration dictate your progress. You've been doing great." But Sarah didn't feel great. She felt like she was failing. She had been working so hard, and yet it still felt like the challenges were too big. She left the community center that day feeling more than just physically drained. She felt emotionally spent as well. At home, she tried to shake off the negative feelings, but they clung to her. Her thoughts were consumed by self-doubt. What if she was pushing herself too hard? What if she wasn't really cut out for this? That night, after dinner, Sarah sat on the couch with a cup of tea, trying to unwind. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emily. "How's everything going, Mom? Let me know if you need anything." Sarah stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to burden Emily with her doubts. She didn't want to admit that after everything she had been through, she still felt like she wasn't enough. But finally, she typed out a response. "I'm struggling, Em. I don't feel like I'm making progress anymore. Everything seems so much harder now, and I'm just so tired." She hit send, and the message felt like a weight lifting off her chest. Just expressing her vulnerability was a relief. A few moments later, Emily responded, "I get it, Mom. I really do. But you've come so far. It's okay to feel like this, but you can't quit now. You don't have to do it all at once. Just keep showing up, and I promise things will get better." Sarah read the message and felt her heart soften. She had been so focused on what wasn't going right, but Emily reminded her that progress wasn't a straight line. It was messy. It had peaks and valleys, moments of triumph and moments of doubt. But the key was that she had already come so far. Emily's words stayed with Sarah that night as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't give up now. She had made it this far. She owed it to herself to keep going, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, determined to not let yesterday's frustrations define her. She got out of bed, stretched, and got ready for her walk. The air was crisp and cool, and as she stepped outside, she realized that, despite everything, her body was still capable of so much. She felt the beat of her heart in her chest, the steady rhythm of her breath. She may not have felt strong yesterday, but today was a new day. She walked for 40 minutes that morning, pushing herself just a little further than the day before. She didn't focus on how far she had to go, or how many more steps were left. She simply focused on the feeling of movement, on the sensation of her body in motion. With each step, the weight on her shoulders seemed to lighten just a little bit more. As she returned home, she received another text from Emily. "You're amazing, Mom. I knew you'd bounce back." Sarah smiled, the tightness in her chest easing. She wasn't out of the woods yet, but she was moving forward again. It wasn't a perfect recovery, but it was progress. That was enough for today. Throughout the week, Sarah continued to show up. She didn't expect every day to be perfect, but she gave herself permission to take the bad days with the good. She learned that recovery wasn't just about physical strength. It was about emotional resilience, too. She could accept the tough days, the moments of doubt, without letting them control her. The trick was to keep going, even when the journey felt impossible. By the end of the week, Sarah was back at the community center for her physical therapy session. This time, she approached the exercises with a renewed mindset. She no longer focused on the frustration of the movements. Instead, she focused on the fact that she was still here, still trying, still moving forward. Mr. Thompson noticed the difference in her demeanor. "You're looking stronger today, Sarah," he said with a smile. "How are you feeling?" Sarah took a deep breath, smiling back. "I'm not perfect, but I'm here. And that's enough." It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a win nonetheless. And Sarah knew that, no matter how difficult things got, she had the strength to keep going. The journey might be long, but every small step counted. And that, she realized, was what made all the difference. As Sarah continued to navigate her physical journey, she began to realize something else. Her transformation wasn't just about her body. It was about the relationships she had, especially with her family. She had been so focused on her own progress, pushing herself toward personal goals, that she had unintentionally neglected the people closest to her. The journey she was on wasn't just about becoming a stronger woman, it was also about rediscovering the strength in the bonds she shared with those she loved most. Her daughter, Emily, had been her biggest cheerleader throughout this process, but Sarah hadn't been as present in Emily's life lately. With all her physical therapy, her daily walks, and her meals, she had become wrapped up in her own world, often leaving little room for the deeper connections she had always shared with her family. She knew she had to change that. One evening, after a particularly tough day, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table with her phone in hand. She had just finished another walk, and though she felt proud of herself, she knew she had missed out on important moments. Emily had sent her a few texts earlier that day, but Sarah had been too exhausted to respond. The exhaustion of the physical routine had caught up with her, and she hadn't been able to focus on anything else. Taking a deep breath, she typed a message to Emily, "Hey, Em. I know I've been distant lately. I've been so focused on myself, but I want you to know I'm here for you, too. How's everything going on your end?" She hit send and waited. It felt like an admission of guilt, but also a realization that the foundation of her transformation wasn't just in her body, it was in her relationships. She didn't want to lose touch with the people who had supported her through every twist and turn of her journey. Emily responded quickly, "Mom, I totally get it. You've been working hard on yourself, and I'm proud of you for that. But I've missed talking to you. It's okay to focus on yourself, but I want to share some things with you too. When you're ready, I'd love to catch up." Sarah's heart softened. She had underestimated the power of these connections, the quiet support that her family gave her every day without asking for anything in return. Her relationship with Emily, in particular, had been one of the cornerstones of her strength, and she needed to nurture it again. The following weekend, Sarah invited Emily over for lunch. She had planned a simple but healthy meal, grilled salmon with a side of roasted vegetables and a fresh salad. Emily arrived on time, and the moment Sarah opened the door, she felt a wave of relief. It had been far too long since they'd spent quality time together, and the warmth of her daughter's smile was exactly what Sarah needed. The two sat down at the table, and as they began eating, the conversation naturally flowed. They talked about Emily's work, Sarah's therapy sessions, and the small victories both of them had experienced over the past few weeks. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt truly present in the moment, her attention not divided between her routine and her family. "You know, Mom," Emily said after a pause, "I've been really proud of how you've handled everything. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've stuck with it. And I know it's not just about the exercise or the food. It's about the strength you've found in yourself." Sarah smiled at her daughter's words. "Thanks, Em. It means a lot to hear that. I've been so focused on the physical changes that I've kind of forgotten to focus on the people who matter most. You've been my rock through all of this." They shared a quiet moment, a sense of mutual understanding filling the space between them. Sarah realized that she had been so focused on herself that she had almost lost sight of the connections that truly grounded her. Later that day, they went for a walk together, something they hadn't done in months. Sarah was pleasantly surprised by how much easier it was to talk and laugh while walking with Emily, rather than keeping the conversation focused solely on her physical progress. They simply enjoyed each other's company, appreciating the beauty of the day and the simple joy of being together. As they walked, Sarah noticed how much her relationship with Emily had grown over the years. They had always been close, but in the past, there had been moments of tension, moments when Sarah had been too wrapped up in her own struggles to be the mother Emily needed. Today, she felt the depth of that bond anew. It wasn't just about giving advice or offering support. It was about sharing experiences, celebrating victories, and being vulnerable with one another. That evening, as Emily left to head back home, she gave Sarah a warm hug. "I love you, Mom. You're doing amazing. Just don't forget that I'm always here for you, too. I love you too, Em. And I promise I won't forget." As Sarah closed the door behind her, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of her personal journey had not only made her stronger physically, but it had also deepened her connections with the people she loved most. This journey wasn't just about becoming a healthier version of herself, it was about becoming more whole, more present, more connected to the ones who had always been there for her. In the days that followed, Sarah made a conscious effort to prioritize the relationships that mattered most to her. She reached out more often to Emily and Jack, shared meals with them, and found moments to truly listen. To stop being the person who was always striving for more, and to just be with them in the present. The physical progress she had made in her health was important, but now Sarah understood that the real strength lay in the relationships she was rebuilding, in the love and support that flowed freely between her and her family. She knew that as long as she had them by her side, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her journey had taken a new turn, one where the strength of her heart was just as important as the strength of her body. It was a Tuesday afternoon when it happened. Sarah was walking through the park, her favorite route, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment as the cool autumn air wrapped around her. She had made incredible strides over the past few months, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of her life again. Every step she took was not just a physical one, but a symbolic victory over the challenges she'd faced. But that day, as she turned a corner near the park's fountain, something shifted. Her right knee buckled suddenly, and before she could react, she stumbled to the ground, her hands scraping against the rough pavement. The shock was instant, the pain sharp and immediate. She winced, struggling to push herself up, but the pain in her knee was too much. A couple of joggers who had been passing by immediately stopped and rushed over to help. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, her voice filled with concern. Sarah tried to smile, but the discomfort in her knee made it impossible to hide her distress. "I think I just twisted it," Sarah said through gritted teeth. The pain radiated up her leg, and for a moment, she felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. "Let's get you up slowly," the jogger suggested. Together, they helped Sarah to her feet, but the moment she put weight on her injured leg, she knew it was worse than just a minor twist. The pain flared again, sharper this time. She gritted her teeth to keep from crying out. "I don't think I can walk on it," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. "I should probably call someone." The joggers offered to help her to a bench nearby, and one of them called an ambulance while the other stayed with Sarah, offering her water and reassuring words. As Sarah sat there, the cool breeze brushing her face, she felt a sense of frustration she hadn't experienced in months. After what seemed like an eternity, the paramedics arrived and assessed her injury. They were kind but professional, quickly wrapping her knee and advising her to seek further medical attention. "It's better to get this checked out with an X-ray," the paramedic suggested. "It might be something more serious than just a sprain." As Sarah was helped into the ambulance, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a major interruption to the progress she had worked so hard for. How could this have happened now, when everything was finally falling into place? The ride to the hospital was a blur. Her thoughts kept spinning, fixating on the worst possible outcomes. What if her knee was seriously injured? What if she wouldn't be able to walk for weeks, months even? The idea of losing the progress she had made was unbearable. She had been so focused on getting stronger, on proving to herself that she was capable, but now, it felt like all that work could come crashing down. When the doctor finally arrived to review the X-rays, Sarah was nearly holding her breath. The diagnosis wasn't what she expected, but it wasn't good either. "You have a moderate sprain, Sarah," the doctor explained. "There's some swelling around the joint, and it's been aggravated by overuse. You'll need to rest it for at least a few weeks. No walking long distances, no physical therapy, and definitely no intense exercise. We'll also need to do some follow-up appointments to monitor your progress." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, it felt like the rug had been pulled out from under her. The idea of staying still, of letting her body rest when it felt like she was finally moving forward, was overwhelming. "I know it's frustrating," the doctor said, reading the frustration in her eyes. "But your body is telling you to slow down. If you keep pushing, you might make the injury worse. We don't want to risk that." As Sarah left the hospital later that day, a mix of anger and sadness swirled inside her. She couldn't believe this was happening. She had been so careful, so mindful of her body, and yet here she was, facing another obstacle. She had worked so hard, only to have it feel like it was slipping away. The next few days felt like a blur. Sarah followed the doctor's orders to rest, keeping her knee elevated and applying ice regularly. But the longer she stayed still, the more the frustration built inside her. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the emotional toll that this setback was taking on her. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and now she had to stop. She couldn't move forward. She couldn't keep pushing. One night, as she sat on the couch, watching TV with her leg propped up, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "How's the knee? You okay?" Sarah sighed, staring at the message for a long moment. She didn't want to tell Emily how defeated she felt. She didn't want to admit that this injury had shaken her confidence more than she cared to admit. But then, she realized something. Emily had always been there for her, through every high and low. Maybe now was the time to be honest, to let her daughter see her vulnerability, rather than the strong, perfect version she had been trying to project. "I'm struggling, Em. It's harder than I thought. I'm frustrated and scared, and I'm not sure what to do next." The message was sent before Sarah could overthink it. She knew that Emily would understand. She always did. Moments later, Emily replied, "Mom, it's okay to struggle. You've come so far, and this is just a small setback. I'm here for you, no matter what. Take it one day at a time, okay? You don't have to do it all at once. I love you." Sarah's eyes welled up as she read the message. It was exactly what she needed to hear. She had been so focused on pushing through the pain and achieving results that she had forgotten the importance of patience. It wasn't about instant progress, it was about persistence, about showing up even when things weren't perfect. The following days were tough. Sarah rested as much as she could, following the advice of her doctor. But she also made a conscious effort to take the pressure off herself. She spent more time with Emily, leaning into the support of her daughter. She realized that she didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to be always strong. She just needed to keep moving forward, at her own pace. The setback didn't define her. It was just a bump in the road. And though it was difficult to accept, Sarah knew that the road to recovery wasn't linear. It was messy. But that didn't mean she was giving up. Not now, not ever. The days following Sarah's injury were painfully slow. Gone were the morning walks that had become a staple in her routine. The lightness she used to feel after each physical therapy session was now replaced by the stiffness in her knee, propped up on pillows as she sat by the window, watching the world move on without her. The silence was deafening. But something unexpected began to emerge during that stillness. At first, Sarah was restless. The lack of motion gnawed at her spirit. She missed the feeling of momentum, of forward progress, of sweat and sore muscles as proof that she was getting somewhere. Now, she was still. And with that stillness came something she hadn't anticipated: introspection. For the first time in months, she had no choice but to sit with herself, not her goals, not her progress photos, not her meal plans. Just, herself. One quiet morning, with her knee elevated and a soft blanket over her legs, Sarah pulled out the old journal she had kept at the beginning of her transformation. She hadn't written in it for a while. At first, it had been a place to track her food and workouts. But now, as she opened it, she realized she had never truly written to herself. Not really. She picked up a pen, hesitated, and then began to write. "I've spent so much time focusing on what I'm trying to fix that I never asked why I felt broken in the first place. Maybe it's not just my legs I'm trying to strengthen, but my heart. My voice. My sense of worth. Maybe this injury is here to teach me that healing isn't always physical. Sometimes, it's internal. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to stop so I could finally hear myself again. As she finished writing, Sarah felt a surprising release. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. She had been trying so hard to prove that she was strong, that she hadn't noticed how much of her healing needed to happen on the inside. The emotional scars of years spent doubting herself, feeling like she had let herself go, or that she wasn't enough, had gone unaddressed. Now, they had nowhere to hide. Later that day, Emily dropped by with groceries and a cup of Sarah's favorite herbal tea. "I brought kale," Emily said with a teasing smile. "Because we both know that without it, you'll order takeout again." Sarah laughed, genuinely. "You know me too well." As they sat down on the couch, Emily reached over and placed her hand gently on Sarah's arm. "You know. I think this injury was a sign," Emily said softly. "You've been running on empty for a long time, even before all this started. You needed a break, not just to rest your body, but to reconnect with you." Sarah looked at her daughter, touched by her insight. "I think you're right," she admitted. "I thought all I needed was to feel strong again. But I realize now that I was chasing strength because I was scared. Scared of aging, of losing control, of being forgotten." Emily's eyes glistened. "You'll never be forgotten, Mom. You're one of the strongest people I know. Not because of how many miles you can walk or what you eat, but because you're brave enough to face yourself." That night, Sarah meditated for the first time. Just 10 minutes. No app, no guide, no timer. Just her, sitting quietly in her bedroom, listening to her breath. At first, her thoughts raced. She thought about her knee. About Elon Musk's warning in that bizarre fruit study. About the old Sarah who would have quit by now. But slowly, the noise began to fade. And what was left was something surprising: peace. The next day, Sarah started implementing small rituals. She made her morning tea slowly, intentionally, appreciating the aroma and the warmth in her hands. She began writing 3 things she was grateful for every night before bed. She called Jack more often, even if just to say hello. She lit candles in the evening and listened to soft jazz instead of watching the news. She wasn't moving quickly. But she was healing deeply. 1 week later, Dr. Matthews checked her progress and was pleasantly surprised. "The swelling's gone down nicely," he said, rotating her leg gently. "You've been resting, clearly." Sarah chuckled. "Against every instinct in my body." He smiled. "Well, it's working. Another week or so, and you can start walking short distances again. But slowly, Sarah. No marathons." "Noted, doctor," she said, feeling a flicker of excitement return. That weekend, Sarah sat on her back porch, watching the wind move through the trees. It was almost poetic, how everything around her had kept moving, even as she was forced to be still. And yet, she hadn't been left behind. She hadn't fallen apart. She had found herself in that stillness. She remembered a quote she once read: "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Maybe this injury, this forced pause, was never meant to derail her. Maybe it was meant to illuminate something deeper, something she couldn't see when she was sprinting toward her goals. The next morning, Sarah stood up with caution and took her first slow, assisted step across the living room. No pain. No trembling. Just steadiness. Not just in her legs, but in her soul. The morning light spilled through Sarah's kitchen window as she took her first unassisted steps in over 2 weeks. No cane, no walker. Just her, walking slowly, deliberately, 1 foot in front of the other across the hardwood floor. Each step was careful, yes, but each one also carried something more profound: quiet confidence. She wasn't just walking again. She was rising. The knee brace was gone, the swelling had faded, and the pain, though still faintly present, was manageable. But more than the physical improvement, Sarah felt something deeper. A shift. She had emerged from the quiet cocoon of injury with a new sense of self. Not just as someone recovering, but as someone reborn. Later that day, she returned to the community center for the first time since the fall. As she entered the familiar space, a few heads turned. Mr. Thompson, her physical therapist, looked up from across the gym, did a double take, and grinned. "Well, look who's back," he said, walking toward her. "I was starting to think you traded us in for early retirement." Sarah laughed. "Tempting. But you know me, I couldn't stay away for long." He raised an eyebrow. "How's the knee?" "Stronger than I expected," she said, her voice steady. "I've been doing the boring stuff. Rest. Ice. Reflection." "Ah yes," Mr. Thompson said with mock seriousness. "The most powerful medicine of all, doing nothing." They both laughed, but behind it was a mutual understanding. Sarah had been to the edge. Not just of physical limitation, but emotional depletion. And she hadn't just come back, she had come back different. During her therapy session, she didn't rush. She didn't push past her limits like she had in the early days. She listened to her body, her breath, her intuition. Each stretch, each balance hold, each rep felt like a small ceremony of trust. Her body, once a source of frustration, now felt like a partner. When she returned home that afternoon, Sarah did something unexpected. She opened her laptop and clicked on the same YouTube video that had sparked this entire journey, the one with Elon Musk and the bold warning in the title, "Seniors, stop eating 7 worst fruits, they are destroying your leg strength." Back then, it had felt like an alarm bell. A wake-up call. Now, she watched it through different eyes. The sensational headline. The dramatic voiceover. The panic-inducing science that had once sent her into a rabbit hole of food fear. She realized that while the video had prompted her to act, it had also contributed to a mindset of fear over empowerment. She clicked pause halfway through. "I don't need fear anymore," she whispered to herself. She no longer needed viral videos to dictate her choices. No more crash diets. No more panic about blueberries or bananas or whether pineapple was ruining her balance. She had learned to listen to herself. That night, Emily came over for dinner. Sarah made grilled chicken, quinoa, and, yes, a fruit salad. When Emily noticed the slices of mango and banana on the table, she smiled knowingly. "Guess Elon Musk would cancel you for this meal." Sarah smirked. "Let him try." They laughed. It felt good. It felt light. Over dinner, they talked about everything, Emily's job, Jack's latest camping trip, and Sarah's plans to volunteer at the senior center in the spring. But more than that, they talked about what had changed in Sarah over the past 6 months. "You're different now," Emily said at one point, setting her fork down. "Not just physically. You seem steadier." "I am," Sarah replied. "I've been chasing strength all this time. But what I've really found is peace." Emily nodded, eyes misting. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Later that night, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, writing in her journal. She didn't need to track macros or calories anymore. What she recorded now was truth, hers. "I thought healing was about fixing what was broken. But it's not. It's about understanding what needed attention. What needed compassion. I didn't need to punish myself into getting better, I needed to love myself into believing I was worth the effort." She closed the journal and turned off the lamp. That night, Sarah slept soundly for the first time in weeks. She dreamed of walking, not as a goal or a measurement of progress, but simply as freedom. The next morning, she woke up early and tied her walking shoes. Not for rehab. Not for weight loss. Not because of a warning from a tech billionaire. Just because she wanted to feel the sun on her face and the pavement under her feet. She walked to the park where it had all happened, the fall, the setback, the self-doubt. But this time, she didn't feel fear as she neared the fountain. She felt gratitude. She paused at the same spot where she had once sat injured and angry. The leaves were starting to fall again. The air smelled like October. Life had come full circle, but Sarah wasn't the same person she had been. She was wiser now. Stronger. Whole. And she was ready. The wind carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves as Sarah stood at the edge of the lake, watching the morning sun cast gold across the water's surface. It had been exactly 6 months since her journey began, since she first watched that over-the-top Elon Musk video with its apocalyptic warning about fruit and leg strength. And now, here she was. Stronger. Calmer. Free. Sarah wasn't just walking again. She was living again, with intention, not fear. Her steps no longer measured progress, they expressed it. And the journey, which started with doubt and desperation, had brought her somewhere she never expected, back to herself. What happens when everything falls apart, and you're forced to rebuild from nothing? That was the question that started this entire story. And now, Sarah had the answer. The weeks following her full recovery had been filled with quiet milestones. Not loud triumphs. No before and after photos posted online. No calorie-counting apps. Just real life. Lived. She rejoined her walking group, not for competition, but for community. She started volunteering at the local senior center, leading a weekly, mindful movement session. No machines, no ego. Just breathing, stretching, and presence. The other seniors adored her, not because she was some fitness guru, but because she was real. Jack even joined one of the sessions, awkwardly fumbling through yoga poses. They laughed so hard that Sarah cried. Not because it was funny, though it was, but because it felt like healing. One Tuesday afternoon, Sarah and Emily hosted a community potluck. The theme was food freedom. Everyone brought something they loved, without guilt or shame. There was fruit salad, yes, loaded with the forbidden bananas and grapes, baked dishes from family recipes, and herbal teas steeped in nostalgia. During dinner, one of the senior center's directors approached Sarah. "You've really changed things here," she said. "People are lighter. More open. It's like they've stopped waiting to be fixed and just started living." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "That's all I ever wanted." That night, as Emily helped clean up, she paused by the window, looking out at the guests gathered around the patio fire pit. "You know what's crazy?" Emily said. "It all started with that wild video." Sarah grinned. "Elon Musk, huh? Never thought he'd be the spark I needed." They laughed. It was absurd. But also perfect. In a final gesture to commemorate her journey, Sarah wrote a letter to herself. She didn't plan to share it. It wasn't for Instagram or a support group. It was just for her. She folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in her journal. "Dear me. You thought this was about fruit. Or strength. Or getting your body back. But this was about learning to love yourself enough to try again. You didn't need fixing. You needed compassion. You needed space to fall. And the courage to rise without shame. You found that. And you kept going. You are enough. Love always. Sarah." A few days later, she returned to the lake where she used to walk at the start of her journey. She stood on the dock barefoot, the wood cool beneath her feet. She closed her eyes, listening to the soft rustle of wind through the trees. She whispered a quiet thank you, to the struggle, the injury, the absurdity of the fruit warning, the support of her family, the silence, the growth. Everything had brought her here. The story hadn't gone the way she expected. There were detours. Setbacks. Tears. Frustrations. But in the end, there was healing. Not just in her legs. But in her life. According to Dr. Ellen Ramirez, a geriatric wellness specialist at the University of Michigan, aging isn't just about avoiding the next health scare. It's about finding meaning, movement, and connection. Sarah's journey is a reminder that strength isn't measured by how much you lift or how far you walk. It's about how deeply you show up for your own life. So, the next time someone tells you to cut out a fruit because it might destroy your leg strength, pause. Breathe. And remember. The real poison is fear. The real strength is love. And the real transformation? It starts when you choose yourself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?